Section 19 of Richelieu by Joseph Gustave Masson. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain, read by Pamela Nagami. Chapter 7. The University of Paris, the Jesuits, and the Collège de France. Philosophy and Erudition, Part 1. The intellectual history of France under Richelieu's government is a subject full of real interest, and to do proper justice would require more space than we can afford. We shall therefore be satisfied with touching upon the principal points in connection with it. Let us glance in the first place at the state of education, and see what had become of the once famous University of Paris, which had during the Middle Ages enjoyed the privilege of attracting scholars from all parts of the civilized world. The constitution of the University of Paris was totally different from that of other educational bodies, both in England and on the Continent. To begin with, it was subdivided into 4 faculties, namely arts, literature and science, theology, civil and canon law, medicine. The faculty of arts comprised 4 nations: the nation of France, including 5 provinces or tribes; the nation of Picardy, likewise divided into 5 tribes; the nation of Normandy; the nation of Germany, divided into 2 tribes: 1, that of the continents, subdivided into 2 provinces; and 2, that of the insulars, including the British Isles. The chief of the university was the rector. The 4 faculties combined elected him, and his tenure of office lasted 3 months. His installation took place with great pomp. It would be both useless and endless to describe the innumerable colleges, the ensemble of which constituted the University of Paris. The Sorbonne was the principal, and it derived its name from Robert de Sorbonne, or Sorbonne, in Latin variously written de Sorbonio, Sorbonia, or Scorbona, confessor of Saint Louis, and usually reported to have founded it. The great merit of the professors appointed to teach there, and the importance of the college in other respects, caused it to be regarded as the headquarters of the university, and to it belonged the right of conferring degrees. The Collège de Clermont must not be forgotten. It had been founded by the Jesuits on the 2nd of July, 1563, despite the spirited opposition of the university, and therefore, in the first instance, far from being one of the annexes or offshoots of the Sorbonne, it was to all intents and purposes a rival establishment. Henry III laid the first stone of the chapel on the 20th of April, 1582. It became affiliated to the University of Paris during the 18th century. Collège de Grassin, Collège d'Harcourt, Collège de Mans, Collège de Bayeux, Collège de Torchy. The list is a very long one, and we are not surprised at hearing Dubreuil, Antiquité de Paris, Pasquier, Recherche de la France, that on important occasions, when the university went to Saint Denis as a body, the head of the procession entered the abbey when the last ranks were still in the church of Sainte Geneviève. The eldest daughter of the kings, in its palmy days, had indeed a formidable power. It is no exaggeration to say that the left bank of the Seine in Paris was under the jurisdiction of the rector. He was bound to inspect all the colleges at least once a month. Appeals against his decrees were decided in the Court of Parliament. Whenever the Pope's legate made in the metropolis a solemn entrance, the rector went to meet him, but awaited him within the walls, and received his oath never to alter or diminish the privileges granted by the Vatican to the University of Paris. In the public acts and ceremonies of the university, the rector always enjoyed precedence over the bishops and even the cardinals and nuncios. If the king came to Paris solemni modo, the rector met him outside the walls, swore homage to him in the name of the university, and His Majesty immediately confirmed the privileges granted to his eldest daughter by the kings his predecessors. Most of these glories, however, had now departed, and the others were very much reduced. The religious wars of the 16th century had dealt to the university a terrible blow. In most of the colleges, both professors and pupils had disappeared. The classes and lecture rooms had been suffered to go to ruin, or were transformed into stables. The few apartments which the lanzknechts, or writers, had left untouched, were appropriated as lodgings by persons who had no connection whatever with the university or with education in general. Henry IV. Was too wise not to feel the importance of providing for the intellectual wants of the country. The attempt at assassination made by Jean Châtel having led to the banishment of the Jesuits, those great educators, the king immediately called together a council of men known by their influence, their learning, and their experience, and entrusted to them the task of remodelling the University of Paris and placing it on a durable foundation. Reynaud de Beaune, Archbishop of Bourges and High Almoner of France, Achille de Harlay, senior president of the Parliament, Jacques Auguste de Thou, president à Mortier, Lazare Coquelin and Edouard Molay, councillors in the Grand Chambre, Jacques de la Grelle, solicitor general, and Louis Servon, advocate general, formed this board, to which were subsequently added the police lieutenant Séguier and Faucon de Ries, senior president of the Parliament of Brittany. The first meeting of this council took place February 9th, 1595. The report was completed in September 1598, and the new statutes were presented to the four faculties on the 18th of September 1600 by de Thou, Coquelin, and Molay. The preliminary work being thus terminated, it remained to provide for its application, and a committee was accordingly named, one of the most active members of which was Edmond Richer, a well-known theologian and an enthusiastic Gallican, who took the opportunity of cautioning his colleagues against the already much talked of re-establishment of the Jesuits, and entreated them to render the competition of the Reverend Fathers useless by timely reforms and energetic action. The incident which Richer dreaded so much came to pass. The Jesuits received permission to reopen their establishments, and thanks to the protection bestowed upon them by Richelieu, thanks also to their really superior system of education, they speedily drew around themselves the vast majority of the pupils. In vain did the university authorities, armed with law texts, edicts, and ordinances, endeavour to stem the torrent. They indeed gained nominal victories, but it was beyond their power to prevent the Jesuits from teaching, and as they could not then boast of educationalists such as Roland, Hersan, Coffin, they had to learn at their own cost that the days of routine were no more. Even allowing for the modifications introduced by the statutes of 1598, the university curriculum was lamentably deficient. The great discoveries of the 15th century, the Renaissance movement, and the struggles of the Reformation had opened fresh channels to the progress of the human mind, and the antiquated traditions of scholasticism could not be expected to satisfy a generation whose fathers had listened to the teachings of Calvin, Theodore Beza, Ramus, Erasmus, L'Hôpital, and Pasquier, and who were themselves witnesses of a revolution accomplished in literature, philosophy, and science by men such as Corneille, Descartes, Galileo, Kepler, etc. The statutes of 1598 had indeed proscribed books written in medieval Latin, and replaced them by Cicero, Virgil, Plato, Horace, Demosthenes, and Homer. but the course of instruction was still very limited in its extent. Latin and Greek grammar and the philosophy of Aristotle. Nothing beyond this was deemed necessary or even advisable. Meanwhile the Jesuits, understanding better the spirit of the age, allotted a large share in their scheme of training to history, the exact sciences, geography, recitation, music, drawing, and dancing. It was all very well to say, as the champions of the university did, that this system of education was superficial and frivolous. At any rate, it met the demands of the public, and in course of time the university understood that the best way of destroying the influence of the Jesuits was not to fulminate edicts, injunctions, and decrees, but to meet them on their own ground, and, if possible, do better than they. It was in 1631 that the idea we are now mentioning suggested itself to the Sorbonne, and the results proved what might have been expected, most beneficial to the cause of public education. Jealous of their privileges, and at the same time so thoroughly wedded to a system of ultra-conservatism that they were gradually allowing all the youth of France to flock round more competent teachers, the university authorities found a formidable rival, not only in the institution of the Jesuits, but in the celebrated Collège Royal, established by Francis I at the suggestion of Budæus. The king's plan had been to organize a body of professors or lecturers, sufficiently well endowed to enable them to teach gratuitously, and who would be entirely independent of the Sorbonne. So long as the Lecteurs Royaux limited themselves to subjects which were not likely to be actively taken up by the majority of students, the Sorbonne doctors did not feel much anxiety. But the creation of a Latin lectureship in 1534 woke them up to a sense of their dangers, and from that time they endeavoured by every means in their power to ruin the Collège de France, either by showing that the privileges it enjoyed had been granted through a flagrant violation of the university rights and immunities, or by trying to bring about the fusion of the two teaching bodies, with the ultimate view of asserting their own supremacy and absorbing, so to say, their powerful rivals. Several lawsuits arose out of this conflict, but the victory remained definitely with the Collège de France. Under the administration of Cardinal Richelieu, several improvements were introduced into the rules and government of the college, and considerable progress was made with the buildings destined for the professors. Up to the accession of Henry IV, they had, for want of a suitable locale, been compelled to teach wherever they could, and it was only in 1609 that the king determined upon appropriating for the purpose of a set of lecture rooms, library, etc., the grounds till then occupied by the colleges of Tréguier and Cambrai. A report on the subject was drawn up by 4 commissioners, namely Cardinal du Perron, Sully, de Thou, and Gillot, a councillor in the Parliament of Paris. The king had further pledged himself to endow the college with a yearly income of 30,000 livres. The death of Henry IV did not put a stop to the realization of the design, for on the 21st of August, 1610, the Queen, Marie de Medici, directed the works to be pushed on, and Louis XIII on the same day laid the foundation stone. The disturbances which took place during the minority of the king caused, however, first a slackening, then a complete cessation of the building, and it was only in 1634 that a fresh start was given. At the death of Richelieu, one of the wings was finished, and Louis XIII had further founded, besides, 2 additional lectureships, one on Arabic literature and one on canon law. In the meanwhile, alterations and reforms of a totally different nature and of a far graver character were taking place in the world of science and literature, which tended to prove that the Sorbonne was gradually losing its influence as a theological and metaphysical teacher, and that the human intellect was breaking the fetters which had for so many years kept it strictly confined. We do not mean, of course, that Cardinal Richelieu originated those reforms, or even gave them his sanction, but they corresponded chronologically to his administration, and they took place during the reign of Louis XIII. Outwardly, as Mr. Demogeo very aptly remarks, things appeared to be going on very much the same as they had done in the days of yore. Scholasticism, applied to the solution of religious problems, seemingly reigned supreme. It was taught by the universities, defended by the parliaments, and protected by princes and magistrates as a political institution. But the roots of the old tree were destroyed. A current of bold scepticism, derived from Erasmus, Rabelais, and Montaigne, and all the bolder in its essence because it was grave and measured in its expression, was penetrating the educated classes of society, preparing the way for the great revolution with which the name of Descartes is indissolubly connected. La Motte Leveillé, Gabriel Naudet, and Guy Patin may be regarded as the chief representatives of that movement, and deserve a brief mention here. When a thinker, having a priori no very settled convictions on any subject, finds himself launched on the sea of erudition, and lives amidst the treasures of an extensive library, it is very difficult for him to keep clear of the shoals of scepticism. Lost in the midst of a chaos of contradictory ideas, which he has neither time nor power enough to sift and to classify, by dint of listening to all the authors who claim his attention, he ends up believing no one. Like Montaigne, La Motte Leveillé had no doctrine. He took the necessary precaution of keeping on good terms with the established authorities, both in church and state, and prudently deemed that no opinion is worth running the risk of being burnt alive or sent to the gallows. Would it not have been far wiser for Giordano Bruno and Etienne Dolet to keep their crotchets to themselves, and to abstain from affirmations which gave a natural handle to inquisitors, judges, and executioners? Pyrrhonians, he said, are of all men those who most willingly and most freely submit to existing laws and institutions. They have never caused any disturbances. Born in 1588, La Motte Leveillé died in 1672, and the period of his greatest intellectual vigour corresponds therefore to Cardinal Richelieu's rule. Trained in the first instance to the law, he soon abandoned it for literature, and became member of a society of savants, who used to assemble at the house of Montaigne's adopted daughter, Mademoiselle de Gournay. He was one of the earliest members of the Académie Française, 1639, and his reputation as a writer induced the Queen, Anne of Austria, to appoint him tutor to the Duc d'Anjou, afterwards Duc d'Orléans. He was so preeminently successful in that post that he was later on, 1652, entrusted with the case of finishing the education of the Dauphin. He obtained the titles of Historiographer Royal and Councillor of State. Moderate in his views and animated by the highest principles, says a distinguished critic, La Motte Leveillé has been often, but most unjustly, accused of atheism. He was extremely witty, and at the same time had all the qualities of a thorough scholar. His reading was wonderful, and so judiciously conducted that it procured for him the designation of the French Plutarch or the French Seneca. The numerous quotations to be found in his books bear evidence to his prodigious memory. He combined with an accurate knowledge of antiquity a sufficient acquaintance with modern history and literature. His style is easy, brilliant, and lively. If he is inferior to Montaigne in point of originality, his erudition is quite equal to that of Bell. Besides a number of educational publications, he wrote several works of a philosophical character. Thus, Considérations sur l'éloquence française (1638), De la vertu des païens (1642), Discours pour montrer que les doutes de la philosophie sceptique sont d'un grand usage dans les sciences (1668), Du peu de certitude qu'il y a dans l'histoire (1668). The titles of these last two books give a clue to the views of La Motte Leveillé on philosophy and metaphysics. He made no mystery of his scepticism, but he maintained that it was la sceptique chrétienne, and that he only followed and illustrated the principles of the gospel, which holds up to contempt the proud dogmatism of the so-called wise, and those vain sciences respecting which the apostle frightens us so much. End of section 19.